Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our channel. You're about to hear a story, one that stirs up notes of the 1960s counterculture, the glittering hope of a new musical era, and the tragedy of how fame can fail to protect a soul that's been hurting all along. This is the story of Ellen Naomi Cass Elliot, a woman whose booming laughter and larger-than-life personality lit up every room she stepped into. People still talk about her voice, an enchanting alto that soared above the breezy harmonies of the mamas and the papas. They talk about California Dreamin'. They talk about flower power and the summer of love. And they talk about that old rumor that she died choking on a sandwich. But who really was Cass Elliot beyond the punchline? Cass was born Ellen Naomi Cohen on September 19th, 1941. In Baltimore, Maryland. Her parents were second-generation immigrants of Jewish heritage, and their household was steeped in a mix of American ambition and old-world resilience. Baltimore's neighborhoods had their own distinct vibes, some more welcoming than others, though often overshadowed by more famous cultural hubs like New York or Chicago. Mid-century Baltimore was a place where people hustled to make ends meet and sometimes found moments of odd, vibrant joy. Ellen, who would later become Cass, soaked up every bit of that environment. She was the kind of kid who loved to sing at synagogue, who belted out tunes in school halls, and whose friends would comment on how her voice made them pause mid-sentence. It didn't take a professional ear to realize young Ellen had a gift. Singing was something she did naturally, like breathing, though she probably had no idea that this voice would one day define her in ways both triumphant and tragic. By the time she was in her teens, Ellen had developed a love for musical theater and comedic acting. She could make her classmates laugh with just the right line and then stun them with a soulful rendition of a Broadway tune. She wasn't the child star type, but in every corner of her life, someone would stop to remark on her raw talent, that big voice contained in an unconventional frame. As the 1950s turned into the 1960s, the cultural landscape was changing just as rapidly as Ellen was growing up. Rock and roll was no longer a novelty. It was a movement. Folk music was becoming the acoustic heartbeat of political change. The civil rights struggle was impossible to ignore, and the youth of America, particularly in college towns, found themselves pulled into discussions about war, identity, and personal freedom. Hollywood had its starlets, but a parallel scene was emerging in coffee houses, nightclubs, and art communes. It was here that Cass Elliot began to find her footing. She left high school early, briefly attending American University in Washington, D.C., but her heart was never in books and classrooms. She yearned for a stage. Like many dreamers, she made her way to New York. The city was alive with possibilities. Smoky Greenwich Village clubs, jam sessions that ran till dawn, and bohemian enclaves that thrived on new, creative energy. In the village, Cass joined up with fellow folk enthusiasts, scraping by on tips and meager booking fees. She sang with a few groups. One of them was the Big Three, a folk trio that made a little noise on the scene. They never hit the big time, but Cass used every show, every chance to refine her stage presence. She was comedic one moment, heartbreakingly soulful the next, and always authentically herself. Audiences started recognizing her not just for her voice, but for her stage banter and effervescent charm. More importantly, Cass began to build a small network of fellow musicians who respected her talent. Among them, folk singer Denny Doherty and the charismatic John Phillips, who later became the nucleus around which the mamas and the papas would form. In those heady days, Cass's persona was blossoming. This was also a time when she began to face an uglier side of the industry, unrelenting commentary about her body. It's no secret that entertainment has always had a narrow definition of beauty, And in the early to mid-1960s, that ideal was even stricter. Producers, club owners, and media people constantly told her she could never be a star with her weight. They told her she'd be a novelty act at best, or a comedic sidekick to a slimmer, more conventionally attractive leading lady. But Cass's voice was extraordinary enough that even these naysayers couldn't fully disregard her. So they tried to mold her. They offered crash diets, humiliating weigh-ins, and backhanded compliments. She fought back, though it came at a cost to her self-esteem. A part of Cass believed that with enough talent she could bulldoze the prejudice. But as she'd discover, prejudice rarely just vanishes. Still, she persevered. By the mid-1960s, the seeds of the mamas and the papas were quietly being planted. John Phillips was the group's main songwriter and visionary. He had a knack for capturing the era's zeitgeist in airy, layered harmonies. Michelle Phillips, his wife at the time, brought a sweet, crystalline voice and model-like visage, while Denny Doherty offered a smooth tenor that slipped effortlessly into John's compositions. Cass Elliot, with that powerhouse alto, rounded out the sound to create a harmonious blend that felt like a dream. Their very name, the Mamas and the Papas, embraced the communal spirit of the hippie movement, though it also subtly pointed to the male-female dynamic that shaped the group's identity. People first heard them on songs like California Dreamin' and Monday, Monday. These tunes captured the sun-washed hope of the West Coast, the allure of living free from constraint in an almost mythic California. It was the height of the folk rock revolution, with artists like Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, and the Byrds dominating the airwaves. Yet the Mamas and the Papas managed to distinguish themselves by weaving pop-friendly hooks and intricate vocal layers with bohemian sensibilities. Right away, Cass's voice was recognized as a linchpin. It gave the songs both warmth and an understated power. Ironically, though, within the band's complex social dynamics, Cass didn't always feel like an equal. John Phillips had a strong personality, and some say he was uneasy about Cass's ability to overshadow the group with her comedic flair and uncontainable stage presence. There are stories about him telling her to stand off to the side or not do this or that on stage. Whether that's entirely accurate is up for debate, but there's little doubt Cass felt tension. Even so, the group soared to stardom almost immediately. Their albums sold by the millions, their image was splashed across magazines, and they became spokespeople of sorts for the flower power generation. Though Cass would later say that all the tie-dye, flowers, and mantras of free love weren't always as blissful behind closed doors as people imagined. During this meteoric rise, Cass was labeled Mama Cass by fans and the press. It started off as a fun stage persona, the affectionate, nurturing presence who made audiences laugh. But over time, Cass realized she couldn't easily separate herself from the caricature. Critics were quick to typecast her as the big, lovable mama, overshadowing her artistry. Even in interviews, journalists tended to ask about her weight before acknowledging her talent, as though her size was more newsworthy than her skill. The public ate up the novelty, and while Cass tried to stay buoyant about it, throwing in jokes at her own expense, the shallow coverage wore on her. It's important to remember that this was a time when body positivity wasn't part of the mainstream lexicon. Actors and musicians who didn't fit the narrow mold often endured cruel jokes or were shunted into side roles. Cass was no exception. The entertainment machine zeroed in on every pound. With each performance, her size was commented on, sometimes overshadowing the actual brilliance of her vocals. Though Cass is remembered fondly today by many, in her own era, the criticism was downright brutal. Friends recall how she'd often make jokes about her weight in private, but the humor masked a deep sense of hurt. She wondered whether people really saw her for who she was, a brilliant vocalist, or whether they just saw a punchline. By 1967, the Mamas and the Papas were among the biggest acts in America. They performed at Monterey Pop Festival, a groundbreaking event that signaled the rise of a new generation of rock. Cass was glowing on stage, delivering performances that electrified the crowd. Yet behind the scenes, the group was in turmoil. Personal relationships were crumbling. Affairs, jealousies, and artistic disagreements chipped away at their unity. There's a famous rumor that John Phillips believed Cass had once been responsible for a mild head injury of his, a story involving a falling pipe, and that he used it as ammunition in their arguments. Whether or not that specific anecdote is fully accurate, it illustrates the bizarre interpersonal tensions that can develop in bands where success arrives quickly and drastically. All the while, Cass was growing restless. She wasn't content to remain pigeonholed, and she yearned to explore her talent in other ways: acting, comedic sketches, perhaps solo albums. Her comedic timing was impeccable, and she started appearing on television variety shows. She even turned up in cameo roles, which is how some fans discovered her outsized personality separate from the Mamas and the Papas. But the band, with all its internal friction, limped along until finally calling it quits in 1968. For Cass Elliot, this was a defining moment. She was stepping into a new phase of her career, but the road ahead was lined with obstacles she never could have anticipated. After the group's breakup, Cass plunged into a solo career. It wasn't smooth sailing. Record executives liked her voice, but were wary of her looks. She faced pushback from producers and label heads who tried to reshape her. A particularly harsh blow came when, during a high-profile performance in Las Vegas, Cass faced criticism from the press that left her confidence in tatters. The audience, which she had hoped would be enthusiastic, sometimes seemed unsure how to react to her comedic persona and the mismatch between the glitzy Vegas style and her more down-to-earth approach. She also clashed with the show's organizers about everything from the set list to costume design, fueling negative reviews. In the midst of these struggles, Cass's personal life remained complicated. She had a daughter, Owen, born in 1967, an event that brought her tremendous joy. But Cass was a single mother navigating an industry that demanded unrelenting energy. She traveled constantly, sometimes leaving her child in the care of trusted friends. Though she showered her daughter with love whenever they were together, Cass wrestled with guilt over her absences, and the cyclical pattern of public scrutiny followed her wherever she went. When newspapers ran stories about her latest concert, they often spent more ink discussing her weight or outfits than her vocal prowess. Still, there were triumphant moments. Cass's solo albums like Dream a Little Dream, 1968, and Bubblegum Lemonade and Something for Mama, 1969, contained flashes of brilliance. The title track, Dream a Little Dream of Me, became a signature tune showcasing her warm, intimate style. She had the ability to make audiences feel like she was singing directly to them, whether in a small nightclub or through a radio speaker in someone's living room. People who knew her personally often said she had an almost maternal warmth, which drew others in. She'd greet fans as if they were long-lost friends, and her willingness to share a laugh or a heartfelt conversation resonated deeply. But along with the highlights came the constant internal battle. Cass struggled with depression, a condition that worsened as her attempts to break through larger barriers of stigma and narrow beauty standards seemed never-ending. She grappled with feelings of isolation. Sometimes, after big concerts where the applause was thunderous, she'd retreat to her hotel room and feel an overwhelming sense of loneliness. That sense of being seen by thousands, yet personally known by very few, can erode even the most confident individuals. Cass, always a sensitive soul, felt this pain profoundly. Close friends, like singer Mary Travers, of Peter, Paul, and Mary, recalled how Cass would sometimes call late at night, needing someone to talk to. Often these conversations included tears, but also Cass's trademark dark humor. She knew how to make light of her own sadness, though the sadness was real. In the early 1970s, Cass moved to Los Angeles. She purchased a home in Laurel Canyon, a neighborhood known for housing the creative epicenter of the era's music scene. Joni Mitchell, Jim Morrison, and members of the Byrds and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young all lived nearby. The area was brimming with jam sessions, experimental collaborations, and carefree parties. For a while, Cass was in her element. Her home became a gathering place for artists. She hosted potluck dinners and late-night sing-alongs. Everyone wanted to bask in her warm vibe and hilarious storytelling. The memories from that Laurel Canyon scene have gone down in music history as almost mythical, like a bohemian paradise perched in the Hollywood Hills. Cass was one of its shining lights, a welcoming host who made every newcomer feel part of the collective dream. Meanwhile, Cass continued to chase new projects. She appeared on various TV shows, including talk shows and comedic specials, displaying a versatility that frequently caught producers off guard. One moment she'd belt out a show tune with the bravado of a Broadway star, and the next she'd spar playfully with a comic host, dishing out one-liners that left the audience roaring. Yet even with a schedule full of appearances, she was still haunted by the knowledge that many saw her as a novelty. The push to either drastically lose weight or accept the role of lovable sidekick grew fiercer. She might appear on The Carol Burnett Show or The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour and earn howls of laughter, but whispers behind the scenes never let her forget how she fell outside the ideal mold of stardom. A new heartbreak arrived in 1972 when Cass endured a disastrous run at the Flamingo in Las Vegas. It was intended to be a triumphant moment, a high-profile gig that would mark her as a serious entertainer, capable of anchoring a prestigious stage. But the circumstances were far from ideal. The stress of the gig, combined with an unprepared backing band and subpar sound equipment, led to a shaky opening night. Reviewers pounced. Some insinuated that Cass didn't have the star power for Vegas. Others used her weight as a lazy comedic angle. Devastated, Cass left the engagement early. Her confidence took another massive hit, and she plunged further into self-doubt. For a time, she was almost reclusive, nursing her wounds in private. Yet Cass Elliot was never one to give up entirely. After regaining some emotional footing, she set her sights on London in 1974. Britain had a deep appreciation for American pop acts, and the Mamas and the Papas had been huge there. Perhaps, she reasoned, a fresh audience would rekindle her spark. She booked a series of shows at the London Palladium, a historic venue known for hosting legends. Early performances went well. Critics praised her vocal control and her ability to connect with the crowd. She seemed poised to relaunch herself, to recast her image from Mama Cass into a mature, respected solo artist. For a few magical weeks, it looked as though Cass's dream was finally being realized. Then, on July 29th, 1974, tragedy struck. Cass was found dead in a London flat she had borrowed from singer-songwriter Harry Nilsson. She was only 32. The official cause was a heart attack, but the tabloids pounced on an unverified rumor that she had choked to death on a ham sandwich found in the room. It was a salacious, cruel storyline that overshadowed the truth. Cass's heart had simply given out, likely the result of the immense stress on her body, from crash diets, from the ups and downs of her career, and from the emotional burdens she had carried for so many years. The rumor about the sandwich, unfortunately, stuck. For decades, people repeated it as though it were fact, turning her death into a callous joke. It's one of those macabre examples of how misinformation can hijack a person's legacy. People who loved her were horrified, but the rumor proved stubborn. It's a testament to how sensationalism often overrides sensitivity. Cass's funeral took place in Hollywood, a gathering of friends, family, and fellow musicians all reeling from the shock. Her daughter was barely 7 years old, forced to navigate a world without her mother's laughter or warmth. Fans, meanwhile, tried to reconcile the joyous figure they'd seen on stage with the knowledge that behind that bubbly exterior, Cass had been deeply lonely. In the years after her death, her legacy was sporadically championed by those who recognized her contributions to music. But because so many fixated on the rumor or on her weight, her rightful place in the pantheon of great American vocalists was largely overlooked. Even so, time has a way of reshaping reputations. Beginning in the late 1980s and early 1990s, critics and music historians started re-examining the mamas and the papas. A new generation stumbled upon their greatest hits, and once again people were mesmerized by those mesmerizing harmonies. Attention turned back to Cass and her role in the group. Documentaries and feature articles delved into her life, the complexities of her career, and the tragedy of her untimely passing. Little by little, the rumor about the sandwich was debunked publicly. Yet it remains one of those bizarre cultural footnotes, popping up in references to her name even today. One of the rarely discussed details of Cass Elliot's story is her comedic gift. In a 1973 interview with a small radio station, she talked about how she had once dreamed of following in the footsteps of Lucille Ball or Carol Burnett, comedic giants who blended humor with heartfelt emotion. But she felt that the music industry didn't take her seriously enough to consider her comedic talent. She also revealed that she'd been approached about starring in a comedic film, but the project never materialized. She blamed her body image battles for the film studio's cold feet. Another lesser-known fact involves her philanthropic streak. Cass was known among friends for her generosity. She sometimes wrote checks to struggling musicians or extended invitations to stay at her home in Laurel Canyon until they got on their feet. Word of mouth from aspiring singer-songwriters suggests Cass acted like a mentor figure for many newcomers, quietly sharing tips and moral support. Many never got the chance to publicly thank her. If you comb through old interviews with her contemporaries, you'll find repeated anecdotes about how Mama Cass was the one who introduced so-and-so to the right producer or gave them the courage to audition for a crucial gig. This sense of communal care was a hallmark of Cass's personality, yet it rarely makes the headlines that rehash her comedic or tragic elements. Her life also invites a deeper conversation about the music industry's treatment of women. Cass confronted criticism about her looks in nearly every facet of her career. Today's climate is somewhat more inclusive, but the fight is far from over. Looking back on Cass's experiences, it's heartbreaking to see how her artistry was overshadowed by her appearance, as if her voice alone wasn't enough. In an era that championed love and peace, the hypocrisy was stark. Society sang along to her tunes, but also ridiculed her body. People who've studied her life often see parallels to modern conversations about mental health, body positivity, and the cruelty of tabloids. Cass was one of the earliest mainstream cautionary tales, a star whose personal battles exposed the hollowness of showbiz's bright facade. Her story also highlights the high price of fame. Cass soared quickly without a robust support system that could shield her from the predatory elements of the industry. She loved performing, but she was also sensitive to criticism, a feeling many artists can relate to. Though she had a close circle of friends, she sometimes found herself utterly alone in moments of crisis. The fact that she passed away in a borrowed London apartment during a period when she was attempting to reclaim her stardom underscores the bittersweet nature of her journey. She had finally glimpsed a new horizon, but her body gave out before she could fully cross it. Reflecting on her ultimate significance leads us to a hopeful yet sobering realization. The hope is that as we celebrate Cass Elliot's legacy, we can focus on her extraordinary gifts and compassionate spirit. Taking lessons from the cruelty she endured, we can commit to being kinder to artists, to seeing them as whole people rather than tabloids fodder. We can challenge the entertainment industry's lingering biases, remembering how Cass's battles took a heavy toll on her. If we do this, perhaps we can continue to dismantle the barriers that keep gifted people from fulfilling their potential, be those barriers about body image, mental health, or the relentless nature of celebrity culture. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.